You have questions written on your salmon cards. If you will just raise them in the air, Bonnie will collect them from you. I want to thank Lori and Ron for a very provocative beginning. You've challenged us to broaden our thinking, to broaden the tent of what a non-theist is, to expand our definitions. And the coming out challenge is before us. Jacques talked a little bit last night about, at least this is how I interpreted it, establishing and increasing our self-esteem and our identity. And I think that our challenge and the fear that we're going to have to face is how do we keep finally our home, our place that we've finally been able to become comfortable in with and expand ourselves, not to lose that safety and still expand who we are so we become an identifiable demographic. So I'd like to call upon the panel first to offer any comments or suggestions, and if you want to direct your question to either Ron or Lori, please do. If not, we'll have either of them answer. There are microphones everywhere. They may have to be turned on. Anyone have a question? Was that you, Adam? Okay.
Well, we actually have a number of very good questions from the audience already.
Oh, good.
But I have my own.
Okay. I was going to say. And you hadn't thought of anything?
I'm torn at which to ask first. I think I'll start with mine and we'll come back to the others. No, I have a better idea. I'll save mine till the end. Then I get
That's better.
Okay, so there are three quick questions. We can have each of them answer as appropriate.
And Siobhan also has some comments she wants to make. So
Great. The first one was for Ron. Thinking about planning a survey, how would you phrase the question to maximize the number of people you would report as not believing in God? Another question for Ron. How would you record in your survey a response that I base my ethical system on my humanistic Jewish religion? Not guided by a supernatural being, but by a moral system evolved from the philosophy of humanistic Judaism. And then, this is my favorite question. As secularists, should we be against tax-exempt status for churches, synagogues, and faith organizations? So let those percolate a little bit. Maybe Siobhan will offer some comments, and then we'll give a chance to answer both.
I was wondering if there's any way to know if the difference, or the process that you're talking about with more non-believers, theistic non-believers, louder, if the more non-theistic people out there, is that the process, or is the process our ability to ask the questions differently? Is the process a process of research, or is the process a process of reality?
Right.
I don't know what's going to be louder.
Do I have to answer that? Let me go to the survey first. As I've been working on all of these statistics, I've been consulting constantly with my daughter, who's a sociologist. And she does qualitative research, but she trains people to do both qualitative and quantitative research. And she, first of all, has helped me kind of get it straight in terms of the statistics. But secondly, she constantly raises the issue, do you believe in God, as a question, provokes the following response. What do you mean by believe, and what do you mean by God? Now, this is the response of a qualitative sociologist who does in-depth interviews, because she says the religious question, the belief question, is so much of a qualitative gray area question that it's virtually impossible to get any meaningful data by ticking a box. A lot of people will say, yes, I believe in God or a higher power. And the real question is, what do they mean? What do they do? How do they live it? In the United States, those people probably live in that vast gray area between non-belief and belief. And there may be some ways in which religion affects their lives occasionally, but it may also be true that by and large they live secular lives in every respect. I know if you watch the World Series, you'll see ball players, thanking God if they get a hit, or especially a home run. But we also know that they're earning $10 or $15 million a year, and they do everything they can with their training in order, and their practice, and their weightlifting in order to be able to hit the ball. And maybe they also add God, and some of them don't. So this issue of what it means is tremendously interesting and tremendously complicated. And in a way, that was my invitation to Charles M. Blow, to say, hey, what we really ought to think about is what does it mean for people to believe in God, and how do they live? Because I'm not so sure that people who call themselves believers, by and large, are much different from us. I think they're mostly scientific-minded, they're mostly secular-minded, they mostly solve problems by using the means at hand, and sometimes maybe they do something else, or they hold something in reserve sometime. But it would be a mistake to make ourselves too different from them and to lose that sense of continuity. So that's the answer to planning a survey, which is to say I'd probably want to avoid that, or I want to plan a qualitative research study based on interviews to get a sense of the real religious experience and irreligious experience of most Americans. So let me, then maybe we can shift to the question that was included, Lori, which is the tax, yeah.
Sure. I'm trying to remember the name of the New York Times reporter who did a series a couple of years ago. I think it was Diane Enriquez, that included information about these tax exemptions. And one of the things she pointed out was that no matter what property the church owns, it's exempt. So you had $1 million retirement homes where they didn't have to pay property taxes in Florida, across the street from $1 million retirement homes where they did, because one was owned by a church. One development was and the other wasn't. In answer, I would say no, there should not be tax-exempt status for churches, temples, mosques, synagogues, religious organizations. In addition to the fact that that includes those kinds of abuses, you have prosperity gospel, you have the main purpose of most religious organizations is to practice their religion. So if they do other nonprofit things, that's very nice, and I know there are secular nonprofit groups get tax exemptions. But there's different rules when you are establishing a religion. The government is not supposed to assist in that. So legally, I'd say no. Politically, there's no way you're going to get that overturned, in my opinion, in the next 10 years. Not even worth the time to try.
Are you up to date? Because Sivan, you want to answer Sivan's? Do you want to try to answer Sivan's question?
Okay. One of the challenges I think that we face is one of the challenges we all try to face is to describe what's going on in reality. So I know it's a difficult question because how to do that. And certainly one of the things that you mentioned was you see a process. If I understood correctly, you see a process in which in American society there are more non-theistic Is that due to the ability to ask different questions, or do you think there's a process around it?
This is one of those cases, I think, where thinking it makes it so, especially thinking it on the part of those who have the power to proclaim what's going on. But it is a matter of asking the survey questions that push the right buttons in people. In the social desirability effect in surveys is really interesting. Do you believe in God? Of course I do. You believe in God, you miserable rat, if you don't. And there is, when you live in any society, there are powerful social desirability effects in which people want to be part of the prevailing outlook. And that is so powerful that it's not even a matter of responding when someone asks you a question directly, but if you're checking a box on a survey form, the same effect is present and influences you. So in this case, reality is a very strange beast. And that's why my question of what do people really believe is an effort to look underneath the surface. So what do Americans really believe, dividing it into the 35%, 35%, 40%, and 25%, I think is a more accurate look if you could get beneath the surface. And it is, that's a project that we need to enlist sociologists, social scientists, we need to enlist people in doing, because it has to be argued and proclaimed at the same time. If you have a simple statistic that says 14% of Americans check no religion, and that number went up between a certain year and another year, immediately the sociological police will jump down your throat and say, no, it can't really be so, and have all sorts of interesting arguments, and then you have to argue back and forth, and by that time nobody's listening anymore. So this is a project, a task, and I want to say a political struggle.
You have a question? Well, I have a couple of things here. First of all, I want to thank you. These questions are amazing. I want to remind you that this is not the last session, and that there will be more opportunities for you to ask questions. A lot of the questions that were asked, I thought, fit into other sessions better, so we've kind of divided those up. Adam's holding them. But this was wonderful. Maybe the survey question should be, do you believe in God when you aren't in an emergency situation? So thank you for that. Right, exactly. No atheists in the
Perhaps
household.
just hit a home run.
Right, exactly. So there's a question here for Lori. Given your success building coalitions, what is going on today with the extreme partisan approach of the Republican Party?
What I've been reading is that even some Republicans have expressed a lot of frustration with the lack of working bipartisanly. I think everybody's reading the same thing. We did, when I was lobbying for the secular coalition, we did get support on some issues from some Republicans. Judith Biggert in the House helped us a lot on the education voucher problem. I don't know where Susan Collins would be with some of our healthcare issues, but it's becoming harder to find bipartisanship lately. I mean, even at the state level, when I served in the Nevada State Senate, when I put in a bill to repeal, we had sodomy laws on the books, we actually made it illegal to do certain consensual sex acts. So when I put in to repeal that, I had plenty of support from Republicans, even though I was a Democrat, and some Democrats voted against me on it. But from the 90s to today, it's a whole different atmosphere at every level. Just almost impossible to work across the aisle, unfortunately.
Our members and neighbors to the north have reminded us that they exist and asked the question, why is there never any mention of your neighbors to the north in statistical analyses? So I think that one's for you.
Beg your pardon. No, because in fact, the probably the first comparison should be with Canada, because although it is the American disposition to think Canada is the same as the United States, it's not so, and in a whole number of respects, from healthcare to the virulence of conservative politics, to, which is much less in Canada, to the religious, secular balance in terms of statistics. There are far more, how is it possible? How is it possible there are far more non-believers in Canada than the United States? But it's true.
Numerically?
Percentage-wise. Percentage-wise. No, not far from America. But in percentage terms, a society which is our next door neighbor and has so many of the same roots, and even worse, is exposed, 90% of Canadians are exposed to American media at a saturation level. How is it possible? But it is that the politics and the religious politics in Canada, despite all sorts of problems, are significantly different. I'll simply point out that the young woman who was for a couple of minutes the Premier of Canada, Kim Campbell, was a conservative, a right-winger, right? Was on Bill Maher's show. This was 3-4 years ago or more. Commenting on George W. Bush saying that she couldn't believe that an American president could say the jury is out on evolution. So whatever it means to be a conservative in Canada compared with the United States, one thing's clear, they don't have to turn in their brains.
Panel comments?
If I learned one thing from watching Sherwin run an hour of colloquia, it's that it's very effective to ask your question and then say we're out of time.
Well, you're going to.
Well, it's good to be the king. Okay. I do have an important question, though. It does touch on both things that Ron and Lori mentioned, and it's the question of working in coalitions. One of the challenges in working in coalitions is that you don't have absolute message control, because you are known by the partners you choose, for good or for ill. Sometimes you share many things in common, sometimes you share a few things in common on a specific issue, but you have to understand that you will sometimes be judged by what they do and not by what you do. So you have a choice. You can decide not to form any coalitions, and then you're only as strong as your own lungs will carry you. Or you form a coalition and you have to live with the difficulties. My congregation in suburban Chicago recently joined an organization called the Chicago Coalition of Reason, which is part of a national network of these coalitions designed to raise the profile of secular, non-theist, atheist, pick your label organizations. They range from internet-based meetup groups to formal religious organizations, humanist chapters of the American Humanist Association, and even a couple of humanistic Jewish congregations. The goal is to raise our profile, and each group has a veto on whatever public message is presented in terms of billboard ads or any other kind of publicity. We had a billboard ad go up just this past week and generated a number of print items in the Chicago Tribune and other locations, including online sources. So it's been very good for raising our profile in that our congregation's name was listed many, many times in these articles. But I did get an email from one of our members saying, what are we doing being associated with these atheists? That's not what we're about. We have a positive humanist philosophy, and it's an individual choice whether you believe or not, and our focus is on what we do believe, what we can focus on, and all those messages that we put in all of our literature trying to be positive. Of course, the headline on the story is always, Atheist Billboard says, blankety blank. Now, the flip side to that, coalition work, is how you're counting who is us. We have to be very careful when it comes to statistics, as Ron highlighted, but also in terms of overemphasizing the positive. That is, if someone says they have no religion, that doesn't mean that they have no God. Karen Armstrong, for example, might say she has no religion. She's not tied to any particular religious tradition. She calls herself a freelance monotheist. So she believes in a God, but not tied to any religious tradition. Or you get people who say they're spiritual, but not religious. That maybe they have a personal God connection, but not a secular idea or even a pantheistic God is nature kind of an idea. They may believe in a personal God and say, I'm spiritual but not religious, because for them religion means institution, it means authority, it means rules, it means dietary laws. So our challenge is, in defining who we are and finding our coalitions, to both do it accurately in terms of counting who's really us, and not overwhelming the reality by trying to sound bigger than we are. But at the same time, being careful when we do try to be bigger, and understanding that in the end we are not going to be the full captains of our faith if we are in bed with somebody else. And so our challenge is to find the right balance.
You like that one?
Sure. John had a couple things you wanted to add.
It should work. If it doesn't, I'll enter
Does it work? Yeah. When I was listening to my colleague, Dr. Aronson, I kept thinking of Freud's line, the dream is a wish fulfillment. And let me explain to you why. For years, I've been contesting those statistics about the massiveness of the secular movement out there. And this follows up exactly on Rabbi Shalom's remarks. I'll do this very, very briefly. There is a tendency in American secular culture to grossly exaggerate what the numbers are. A few examples. Daniel Dennett on the pages of the New York Times claimed he had 27 million rights, bayonets at the ready, to go into battle with him against non-naturalist worldviews. The Secular Coalition of America, at one point, I don't know if you have it still on the website, claimed there were 63 million secularists in the United States. The numbers are just way off, and I think strategically it is catastrophic to assume that there are that many folks geared and ready for action in secular America. Let's go to the survey data for 1 second. It's one thing to tell a demographer that you are a Catholic. Right? A Catholic is a person with a creed, with a dogma, with fathers, nuns, places to work out, if you so desire, a cradle to grave ideology. Right? It's a very, very different thing to say you don't believe. You're not part of anything. You're potentially part of an organization that, if they were intelligent enough, could recruit you into the organization. But from an organizational perspective, you are inert. You are nothing. You're simply a person that told a demographer that you don't believe in God or you don't belong to a religious group. Now, that's step one. Step two is identifying the organizing structure that will bring those people to actualize their non-belief in some coherent political way. It's a mistake that non-believers in the United States make again and again and again. It's like Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown. It happens decade after decade. Now, why am I a little frustrated over it? I've written about it in a book. I've written about it in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I've written about it in the Washington Post. Should I tattoo it on the ass of every secularist in the United States? That the numbers are very small, and this is where the infrastructural work begins, right? I think you're right. The numbers are hovering between 2 million to 8 million, what I would call cognizant atheists and agnostics. Those are people that really understand what atheism is, what agnosticism is, and that's a lot, right? It's not one thing. It's about 100 different things. Anyone who's ever taught courses in colleges on what these things are. So I just want to really caution, following up on the rabbi's remarks, ours. This tendency to think we're enormous. We're going to open up a can of whoop-ass. Here we come. Right? We're going to take you down. Here. Tax-exempt status for churches. Sure, let's go into that battle. All 212 of us. Americans will love that. That'll make us a lot of friends. It's a quasi-delusional pathology, right? It often happens on the left, by the way, to assume that they're much, much larger than they actually are. So I say this in a very friendly way, with a certain degree of personal frustration that I don't know how else to get the message across. That unless some type of accurate census is taken, and I mean an act like understanding, and I'll give you one suggestion. Why not, instead of meeting with congresspeople, secular groups often say, we met with a congressperson. All right, I have students at Georgetown University in the School of Foreign Service who won't take a meeting with a congressperson, cabinet level only. That's what they'll tell me. I'm not coming out unless it's a cabinet level person in the Obama administration. Right? Those are undergrads. Right? Because they're Washingtonians. Right? They understand that a meeting with a congressperson is irrelevant. These are 21-year-old kids that understand it means nothing. Right? Here's a better strategy: be a congressperson. All right, now we're talking. Right? What I've for years begged secularists across the United States to do is conduct a census of places where these non-believers are and in congressional districts. Target 10 of them to 20 of them. It's a $20 million project at least. All right? And run those candidates in those districts. If you run 20 of them, maybe you'll win one or two first time around. And then in addition to Pete Stark, in addition to Tammy Baldwin, who I think is also about to join the team, all right? Then you have 4. Then you can talk about a caucus. All right?
Well, I'm not going to try to say there's 60 million. I do want to point out that there are also people who identify as Catholic or any other religion who don't believe in a God. And so many of even the ministers that I work with have shocked me when they say, I think I'm closer to your actual beliefs, and yet they actually minister the theology itself.
I want to thank the panel and certainly Ron and Laurie for their very